let me just say, with regard to these existential threats, one of the things I put in my title, which I don't think I read to you, is this overreach? And I think you need to ask that, am I overreaching on these things or not? And that's obviously an important question that is essential in science. Healthy skepticism is always the basis of good science. Okay, now let's talk about cellular DNA damage of 3 different types. So we have, by the way, the free radical products of peroxynitrite and it has a carbon dioxide adduct also are involved in, and they do produce these attacks on the cellular DNA. They can produce both single and double-stranded DNA breaks. They can produce oxidized bases, of which the one that's been studied the most is this one. And so all of these have been shown to occur from EMF exposures, low-intensity EMF exposures in human cells and animal cells. And they in turn can cause both cancer and germline mutations. And so, and obviously both of those things are important. And let me say my concern that I want to discuss here really has to do with the question of germline mutations. So, we have, people all over the world are being exposed to these EMFs. And the question that one has to be concerned about is our gene pool, which is the sum total of all the genes in our germline cells, is it becoming highly degraded? Is the DNA in the gene pool becoming highly degraded as a function of all of these things that are going on with the EMF exposures? And I've looked for evidence in the human genetics literature that would tell me whether we see large increases in these kinds of mutations that are produced by these kinds of changes in the DNA. And I have not been able to find out whether there have been large increases in these things or not. And so this has been a matter of great frustration to me. I don't know how far along this thing is. And there are, so I don't really know how, how much we need to worry about that, but it is, at least potentially a very large problem. Okay, now let's talk about cancer. Because cancer is also produced by the DNA effects. It's also produced by other things that EMFs do, which I'm not going to talk about here. With regard to 5G, the millimeter waves that are used for 5G, the electrical parts of those waves are largely absorbed in the outer 1 millimeter of the body, that is basically in the skin. So the electrical parts, the magnetic parts, however, are highly penetrating, and they can both produce effects, but the electrical parts may be expected based on this to produce particularly high effects right near the surface of the body. And so the kinds of cancers that are produced from those cells are the things that we most have to worry about with regard to 5G. And those include melanomas, leukemias, and lymphomas. So melanomas obviously have to do with the skin cells. But it's also true that the white blood cells that are the precursors for leukemias and lymphomas circulate through the skin, and so they're exposed at the surface as well. And so those are the things that probably we have to be most concerned about. Let me just say, Dr. Ollie Johansson has argued that EMFs cause melanomas. And the part of the reason for his argument is that we're seeing more and more melanomas occurring in parts of the body that are rarely, if ever, produced. Rarely, if ever, exposed to sunlight, which has ultraviolet light that can cause the melanomas. So so something else must be causing these, and the obvious explanation is EMFs. That may be another issue here, and that might be obviously very important because the very high intensities by which these 5G are going to impact the outer parts of the body, and that's now. Let me say, I was going to talk to you about EHS, and I don't have. I was unable to develop my slides on that. In the paper that I published last May, there were interesting studies which I found, which showed that animal tissues exposed to millimeter waves became hypersensitive to EMFs. And so they were developing EHS-like effects in those tissues. And there clearly the EMFs were causing it. And there's other evidence that EMFs cause EHS in humans. Then the question is, what is happening when EHS is caused by this? And the interesting thing is that there was a study done where the electric organ of the skate, this is the fish that's related to sharks and rays. It has a similar electric organ. It has an electrosensor. The electrosensor becomes hypersensitive from previous EMF exposures. And why is that important? Well, it's important because the electrosensor is known to be a VGCC. It's known to be a voltage-gated calcium channel. And so what that means, the voltage-gated calcium channel is becoming hypersensitive as a function of previous EMF exposures. So we now have, I think, an outline at least for how EHS can be produced by previous EMF exposures. And I suggested in there several things. One is that there is evidence that this occurs in humans as well, and in human EHS patients, or at least one human EHS patient that was studied by Dr. Waldmann Selsam in Germany. And I suggested in there a possible test for EHS, a simple test for EHS. I won't talk about those, but I believe we're at the point where EHS is something where it's clear that there are effects, that a lot of the effects go through the nervous system, but probably not all of them, because there are cardiac effects in some people with EHS, and that the primary target is probably the VGCs themselves, that they become hypersensitive, and so we now have at least some understanding about how that might happen. Okay, now I'm just gonna. This is my last slide here, and I'm going to go back to the issue that I started with, the first existential threat being a deterioration of our brain function, as we see from the various neuropsychiatric effects. and just look at some things that have been clearly in the news over the last weeks, months, that are very difficult to explain, but may in fact be explainable through the impacts of EMFs on our brain. So this is speculation, okay? And whether it's good speculation or not, I'll let you decide. But we have things like inexplicable police violence, including homicidal violence. We know there's high-powered Wi-Fi in police cars. There might be a possible role of VHS in addition to direct effects of the Wi-Fi on the brains of the police. Who knows? What you can say, I think, for certain is, if this is right, and I'm not telling you for certain it's right, then the kinds of things that people are thinking about for trying to prevent this aren't going to work. It's simple as that. If you're going to try to prevent this, you've got to deal with the cause. We have large amounts of behavioral problems in schools, in children who've come back to school after the COVID pandemic has at least slowed down. And most of these children spend months, many hours per day at home on Wi-Fi doing distance learning. And yet we have many behavioral problems. Is one thing causing the other? Well, we don't know, but it's certainly a possibility. Again, if you don't deal with the cause, you can't get an improvement in it. We've had huge numbers of incidences of inexplicable behavior among both airline personnel and flyers. And we know that there's lots of EMFs in aircraft, particularly produced by the Wi-Fi that's been put into them. And again, they're with all of these, I think you can think about possible roles of VHS. We had large increases in murder rates in 2020, 2021. Could that be connected? Who knows? We have very large increases in road rage. We know anxiety is one of the things that's produced by EMFs in people, right? That can be involved in all of these things, really. And and what about all the politicians who spend long hours on their cell phones? What may be happening to their brain function?